My sister wants him gone, I heard my parents say. They kicked me out. I went to my grandpa, who told me he owned their house. He called them and said, "You have 1 week to pack up and leave." You know, I genuinely believed I understood what family meant. That is, until my own flesh and blood looked my parents dead in the eyes and demanded I be thrown out into the freezing winter night. It was a betrayal so profound, it shattered everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. Growing up in our modest suburban home, our family was just my father Thomas, my mother Maria, my younger sister Sophia, and me. From my earliest memories, there was always this imbalance. This subtle, pervasive favoritism. My parents, especially Mom, practically worshipped Sophia. She was the youngest, the only daughter, and everything revolved around her. The pink bedroom with custom furniture, every request granted instantly. Even her tantrums were excused. "She's just a little girl, Ignacio," Mom would say whenever I dared point out the disparity. "You need to be the bigger person. You're the older brother." That phrase, "be the bigger person," it became the soundtrack to my childhood. I internalized it. I built my entire personality around being responsible, reliable, undemanding. I got perfect grades, worked part-time from 16 to help with bills, and cleaned without being asked. I tried so hard to earn their approval, to be everything they wanted. My father, Thomas, was quieter about his favoritism. He tried to maintain a facade of neutrality, a brief nod for my achievements, maybe a pat on the shoulder. But when it came to important decisions, he always sided with Mom and Sophia. His conflict-avoidant nature meant he'd never challenge my mother's obvious bias. "Your mother knows best," he'd whisper to me after particularly unfair incidents. "Just focus on your studies, son. That's something no one can take from you." If only I'd known how prophetic those words would become. When it came time for college, I had scholarship offers from amazing universities. But our family was struggling after Dad's company downsized. So, I chose the local state university with a partial scholarship. It meant I could live at home, save money, and help them with bills. At first, Sophia, who was 14 then, actually seemed okay with it. She liked having me around to help with homework or give her rides. But as she hit high school and I kept excelling, her attitude completely changed. The first incidents were subtle, almost deniable. My textbooks would vanish before big exams, only to magically reappear under her bed. "I was just borrowing them," she'd claim, eyes wide and innocent, and my parents would believe her every single time. My important papers would have coffee mysteriously spilled on them. My carefully prepped meals in the fridge? Gone. No one ever admitting to it. The one person who truly saw through Sophia's act was my grandpa Albert. He was my dad's father, a straight-talking, former construction worker who built his own business from scratch. He lived about 40 minutes away, in a modest house with a huge workshop. During my visits, which became more frequent as things got worse at home, Grandpa Albert just listened. He never dismissed my concerns. "Some people get jealous when they see others succeeding," he told me once, as we refinished an old desk. "Your sister might be acting out because she's trying to find her own path, but that doesn't make it right for her to tear you down, or for your parents to let her." His workshop became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and be heard. I had no idea then how vital this connection would become when my world finally imploded. The last few months before the blow-up were a blur of escalating hostility. Senior year, things were finally clicking for me. A prestigious scholarship covered the rest of my tuition. I even landed an interview for a competitive internship at Anderson Financial Group, a huge name in our region. My accomplishments, it seemed, didn't make Sophia proud, they triggered her. Her annoyance turned into a full-blown campaign to undermine me. One Tuesday evening, I came home to find my laptop screen shattered. I'd left it safely in my desk drawer that morning. "Maybe you left it on your bed and sat on it," Mom suggested when I brought it up at dinner. "Mom, I never put my laptop on my bed," I said, my voice tight. "And this crack looks like something hit it." Sophia just pushed her food around her plate. "Why do you always blame me for everything? I wasn't even home. The repair cost $300, money I was saving for interview clothes." My parents refused to believe Sophia was involved, even though she was the only other person home. A week later, my flash drive with my senior project disappeared. I tore my room apart looking for it. I finally found it in the bathroom trash can, broken in half. When I confronted her, she played dumb. I lost a week's worth of unsaved work. I was desperate. I tried talking to her, just us, hoping to appeal to the connection we once had. "What's going on, Sophia?" I asked, when our parents weren't home. "If I've done something to upset you, can we talk about it? This tension is awful." She looked at me with eyes I barely recognized. Cold. "Not everything is about you, Ignacio. Maybe I'm just tired of living in the shadow of Mr. Perfect. Do you have any idea what it's like to constantly hear, 'Why can't you be more like your brother?'" My heart sank. "I've never tried to make you look bad," I said, genuinely surprised. "And I've always helped you." She just laughed, a bitter, cutting sound. "That's even worse. Your condescending help just proves how much better you think you are." The conversation imploded. She stormed out, slamming her door. Attempts to involve my parents only resulted in them telling me I was too sensitive and needed to give Sophia space. The situation spiraled. Sophia started inviting friends over specifically when I needed to study, blasting music, leaving messes everywhere that I'd usually end up cleaning. Then came the rumors. At a cousin's party, I overheard my aunt asking my mother if I was doing better now, making comments about stress and mental health. Sophia had been telling relatives I was controlling and paranoid, making up stories about her damaging my things because of academic pressure. Through it all, I maintained my grades, often studying at the library or Grandpa Albert's. I kept trying to keep the peace. I had no idea how soon my father's words, "Focus on what no one can take from you," would be tested. The day before my Anderson financial interview, I was more prepared than for anything in my life. I'd researched the company inside out, practiced questions, even prepared a presentation showcasing my analysis. Everything was saved on my laptop and backed up to an external hard drive in my desk. I ironed my shirt, polished my shoes. Interview at 9 a.m., leave by 7:30. I set 3 alarms. I felt confident. Ready. Then, disaster. I woke at 5:30, wanting one last review. I opened my laptop. The files. Everything. Gone. Not just the presentation, but all my interview prep, resume versions, my entire portfolio. The folder was deleted. My heart pounded. I reached for my external hard drive. It was missing. Frantically, I searched. I found it in my trash can, physically damaged. Broken. There was no question in my mind who was responsible. Shaking with rage and panic, I marched to Sophia's room. I knocked hard. She answered, bleary-eyed and irritated. I held up the broken hard drive. "Why would you do this?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Do you have any idea how important today is?" Her expression shifted from sleepy confusion to pure defensive anger. "What are you talking about? I didn't touch your stupid computer stuff. Maybe you should be more careful instead of always blaming me." "This wasn't an accident, Sophia. The files were deleted. The hard drive was broken. You're the only other person with access to my room." "You're being paranoid again," she sneered, rolling her eyes. "Mom and Dad are right about you needing help." Our raised voices brought my parents to the hallway. My mother immediately went to Sophia's side, an arm protectively around her shoulders. "What's going on? Why are you yelling at your sisters so early?" she demanded. I explained everything, showed them the damaged hard drive, described the deleted files. "I have my interview today. Everything I prepared is gone." My father frowned. "Are you sure you didn't accidentally delete them yourself, son? Sometimes when people are stressed." "Dad, I didn't accidentally break my own hard drive and throw it in the trash." I exploded, frustration boiling over. "This has been happening for months. My things get damaged, my work gets sabotaged, and nobody in this house seems to care." "Here we go again," Sophia sniffled, her voice trembling, a performance I knew well. "He always blames me for everything. I can't do anything right in his eyes. I found the hard drive broken in my trash can." I shouted, finally losing all composure. "Who else would have done it?" "Don't you dare raise your voice at your sister," my mother snapped. "She said she didn't do it, and that should be enough." In that moment, something inside me just broke. Years of swallowing injustice, of being told to be the bigger person, of watching Sophia manipulate them, it all came pouring out. It's never enough. She's been sabotaging me for years, and you both enable her. She ruined my textbooks. She stole money from my wallet. She deliberately makes noise when I'm studying. And now she's destroyed the materials for the most important interview of my life. And you still take her side? My parents looked shocked by my outburst. Sophia seized the opportunity. She started sobbing dramatically, burying her face in Mom's shoulder. "I can't take this anymore," she wailed. "He hates me and makes up these horrible accusations. I don't feel safe with him here." She looked up at them, tears streaming, and said the words that would change everything. "I want him gone. Either he leaves, or I do." The silence was deafening. I waited, praying they'd finally see through her, that they'd recognize the childish power play. Instead, my father cleared his throat and looked at me with a cold detachment I'd never seen before. "Ignacio," he said, his voice flat, "I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay for a while. This situation has obviously become untenable." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're kicking me out because she demanded it." "We're not kicking you out," my mother quickly interjected. "We just think everyone needs space to cool down. You're an adult now, and maybe it's time you lived independently." The night before my interview, when I have nowhere to go, I looked from one parent to the other, searching for any sign of the people who had raised me. "Are you serious right now? You can stay with friends for a few days until we sort things out," my father offered, not meeting my eyes. "You mean until you figure out how to tell me not to come back without feeling guilty?" I said, the truth dawning with painful clarity. "Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You're choosing her. You've always chosen her." No one contradicted me. Sophia had stopped crying and was watching the scene with barely concealed satisfaction. "Fine," I said, the word raw. "I'll pack my things." I stumbled back to my room, throwing clothes into my old duffel bag, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Through the thin walls, I could hear my parents comforting Sophia, reassuring her everything would be all right now. As I packed, the reality crashed down. Less than $500 in my account. It was the middle of winter, below freezing. Most of my friends were in dorms with strict rules, or shared apartments where a sudden guest wouldn't be welcome. And that interview, the one I was now completely unprepared for. When I emerged with my duffel bag and backpack, my family sat in the living room, watching TV as if nothing had happened. No one spoke as I walked to the door. No one asked where I would go. No one said goodbye. As I put my bags in my old car, a 15-year-old sedan I'd bought with my own savings, I realized there was only one place I could go. Only one person who had consistently been in my corner. I started the engine, tears blurring my vision, and headed toward the one sanctuary I had left, Grandpa Albert's house. The drive was agonizing. The normally 40-minute journey stretched to over an hour as I navigated the darkness, pulling over twice to collect myself. The temperature gauge read 28 degrees, and light snow began to fall. It was almost 11 at night when I finally knocked on his door. Despite the hour, lights were on inside. Grandpa Albert answered quickly, dressed in flannel pajamas, reading glasses perched on his nose. His expression shifted from surprise to deep concern as he took in my red eyes and the bags at my feet. "Ignacio? What's happened, son?" he asked, immediately stepping aside. The warmth of his house enveloped me, the familiar scent of wood polish and coffee and instant comfort. In his living room, a fire crackled, and his old leather armchair waited like an old friend. "They kicked me out," I choked out, my voice breaking. "Sophia told them she wanted me gone, and they chose her again." Grandpa Albert's face darkened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "Come in, sit down. Tell me everything." For the next hour, I poured it all out. The escalating sabotage, the deleted files, the broken hard drive, the confrontation, and finally, my parents' decision to send me away with nowhere to go. Grandpa listened without interrupting, his weathered hands occasionally clenching into fists, his eyes fixed on mine. When I finished, the dam finally broke. Years of pretending, of swallowing injustice, came out in heaving, uncontrollable sobs. Grandpa moved to sit beside me, his arm around my shoulders like when I was a child. "Let it out, son," he said quietly. "You've been holding on to this for too long." After my tears subsided, he brought me a glass of water and sat across from me, his expression grave. "I've watched this situation develop for years," he said. "I kept hoping Thomas would find his backbone, and Maria would see what was happening. But they've been blind, willfully blind, to how they've treated you compared to your sister." He stood up, pacing in front of the fireplace, his normally stooped posture straightening with resolve. "What they did tonight is unforgivable. Throwing their son out into the cold with nowhere to go over a teenage girl's tantrum. No, this ends now." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. a steel that went beyond ordinary anger. There's something you need to know, Ignacio. Something I've kept quiet about for your father's sake. But I see now that my silence has only enabled their behavior. He walked to a wooden secretary desk, unlocked a bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder of documents. 10 years ago, when you were 13, your father's company went through major layoffs. Thomas wasn't just having financial difficulties like they told you. He was underwater on the mortgage, maxed out credit cards, 3 months behind on payments. They were weeks away from foreclosure. I stared at him, trying to process this information that contradicted everything I'd ever been told. Why didn't anyone tell me? Your parents were too proud, Grandpa said, and they wanted to protect you kids. But the situation was dire. Thomas came to me, not for advice, but about filing for bankruptcy. He handed me the folder. Inside were property deeds, mortgage documents, legal papers. As I scanned them, one fact became stunningly clear. Grandpa Albert was listed as the owner of my parents' house. I couldn't let them lose their home, he explained. So, I paid off their mortgage and legally purchased the house from them. We agreed they would live there rent-free, paying only property taxes and utilities until they got back on their feet. He shook his head sadly. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but years passed, and Thomas never mentioned taking the house back or paying me for it. He and Maria have been living in my house all this time, pretending to everyone, even you kids, that it's still theirs. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The house I'd grown up in, the home I'd just been expelled from, didn't even belong to my parents. All these years, they'd maintained the fiction of homeownership while living on Grandpa's generosity. Does Dad know you're showing me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Grandpa Albert's expression hardened. At this point, I don't care if he knows. What they did tonight crossed a line. They've forgotten not just gratitude, but basic human decency toward their own son. He sat down heavily in his armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. I've been too soft, letting them maintain their pride at the expense of honesty. But now I see that my kindness has allowed them to develop a warped sense of entitlement, the very thing they've fostered in your sister. He looked me directly in the eyes. Tomorrow morning, we're going to make some changes. It's time Thomas and Maria remembered who actually owns that roof over their heads and what real family loyalty looks like. What are you going to do? I asked, a mix of fear and curiosity churning inside me. I'm going to remind them of our arrangement, he said simply. And I'm going to give them a taste of what they just did to you. But don't worry, unlike them, I have a plan to make this right, not just tear things apart. That night, I slept in the guest room. It had gradually accumulated my belongings over years of weekend visits. Clothes in the dresser, books on the shelves, even my own toothbrush. As I drifted off, I realized that while my parents' house had never truly felt like my space, this room had always been mine, without question or condition. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever happened next, I knew I wasn't alone. And sometimes, having just one person truly in your corner is enough to change everything. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee. For a moment, disorientation, then the events of last night came rushing back. My interview at Anderson Financial Group. I checked my phone, 7:15 a.m. The interview was at 9. No presentation, no portfolio. Going seemed pointless, but the thought of giving up without trying felt even worse. When I emerged, Grandpa Albert was already dressed, sitting at his kitchen table with a notepad and his old flip phone. Good morning, he said, pushing a mug of coffee toward me. Figured you'd be up early. Big day. I still have that interview, I explained, but all my materials were deleted. I'm thinking of calling to reschedule. Go anyway, Grandpa said firmly. Explain the situation honestly, not the family drama, but that your presentation was lost due to a technical issue. Show them how you handle adversity. That tells them more about your character than any prepared speech. His advice made perfect sense. I quickly showered and dressed. My clothes were wrinkled, but presentable. I'll be back this afternoon, I told Grandpa. Thank you again for taking me in. This is your home, too, Ignacio. Always has been. He paused. When you return, we'll make that call to your parents. I think it's best if you're here for it. The interview went better than I could have expected. I explained the data loss and asked if I could walk them through what my presentation would have shown. They agreed. For the next hour, I demonstrated my knowledge, answering questions with all the confidence I could muster. Resilience and adaptability are qualities we value highly, the senior partner told me as we concluded. We'll be in touch next week. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the time I returned to Grandpa's, it was just past noon. I found him in his workshop, sanding a piece of wood for a rocking chair. How did it go, he asked. Better than expected, I replied. They seemed impressed that I showed up at all. He nodded approvingly. Good. Now, are you ready for the next challenge? Inside the house, Grandpa Albert placed his phone on the kitchen table, put it on speaker, and dialed my father's number. It rang 3 times. Dad, what's up, Thomas? Grandpa's voice was calm, but colder than I'd ever heard it. I'm calling about Ignacio. He showed up at my door last night with nowhere else to go. There was a pause before my father responded, defensively. We had a situation here. Sophia was upset. I know exactly what happened, Grandpa interrupted. Ignacio told me everything. What I want to know is how you and Maria could throw your own son out with no warning and nowhere to go. It's not like that, Dad. Dad protested. We just needed some space to cool down. Some space? In the middle of winter, at 11 at night, with an important interview the next morning after his sister deliberately sabotaged his work. I could hear my father sigh. Dad, you don't understand the dynamics here. Sophia has been feeling put. Put Maria on the phone, too, Grandpa said sharply. I want both of you to hear what I have to say. Muffled conversation, then my mother's voice. Albert, what's going on? I'm going to say this once, Grandpa began, his voice steady and authoritative. I am deeply disappointed in both of you. For years, I've watched you favor Sophia while expecting Ignacio to be the responsible one, the forgiving one, the one who never complains, no matter how unfairly he's treated. I said nothing because I didn't want to interfere in how you raised your children. That was my mistake. Neither of my parents spoke, but I could almost feel their tension through the phone. Ignacio has been nothing but supportive of your family, Grandpa continued. He chose a local college to save money and help with bills. He's maintained perfect grades while working part-time. He's been patient with his sister's jealousy and your blind eye to her behavior. And how do you repay him? By throwing him out when he finally stands up for himself. Albert, we didn't throw him out permanently, my mother said, her voice tight. We just needed a cooling off. Period. Don't lie to me, Maria, Grandpa snapped. You made no arrangements for where he would go. You didn't even ask if he had enough money for a hotel. You didn't call to check if he arrived safely somewhere. Your actions show exactly what you intended. Another uncomfortable silence. Then my father spoke again. Dad, I understand you're upset, but this is between us and Ignacio. We'll sort it out as a family. That's where you're wrong, Thomas. This became my business the moment you forgot who owns the house you're living in. The stunned silence that followed was deafening. They hadn't expected this. What are you talking about? My house, my mother finally asked, her voice cracking. Your house? Actually, as the deed and mortgage clearly show, the house I purchased 10 years ago when you were facing foreclosure, the house you've been living in rent-free all this time while pretending to everyone, including your children, that it still belongs to you. Dad, my father said, his voice suddenly shaky. We agreed that arrangement was private, and you agreed it was temporary, Grandpa countered. Yet here we are a decade later, and you've never once mentioned taking back ownership or reimbursing me. That's fine. I never expected the money back. What I did expect was gratitude and decent treatment of both your children. I could hear my mother starting to cry. Albert, please. We didn't mean. You have 1 week, Grandpa interrupted, his voice firm. 1 week to pack your things and leave my house. The shock on the other end was palpable. You can't be serious, my father stammered. Where would we go? We don't have savings for a deposit. Should have thought of that before you put your own son in exactly the same position, shouldn't you? Grandpa replied coldly. But what about Sophia? My mother asked desperately. She's still in high school. We can't just uproot her. You should have considered that before allowing her to demand Ignacio's removal, Grandpa said. 1 week. I'll be by on Saturday to check your progress. With that, he ended the call. The kitchen fell silent as the gravity of what had just happened settled over us. Did you really mean that? I asked finally. About making them leave in a week? Grandpa Albert's stern expression softened as he looked at me. Not entirely, no. I wouldn't actually put them on the street. I'm not cruel like they were to you. But they don't know that yet. He sat down at the table. What they did was wrong on every level, Ignacio. As parents, as decent human beings, and especially considering the fact that they don't even own that house. They needed a serious wake-up call. What's the real plan then? I asked. The plan is to let them sweat for a few days. Let them experience the panic and uncertainty they inflicted on you. Then, when I go over on Saturday, I'll lay out some conditions. First, a formal apology to you. Second, acknowledgement of Sophia's behavior and consequences for her actions. Third, family counseling to address the dysfunction that's been allowed to fester. He reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over mine. In the meantime, you'll stay here with me. I've been thinking of converting the workshop attachment into a small apartment for years. This is the perfect opportunity. You can have your own space, finish your degree, and start your career without their drama holding you back. The relief that washed over me was immense. Not just for having a place to stay, but because for the first time in years, someone was standing up for me, acknowledging the unfairness. What if they refuse your conditions? I asked. Grandpa smiled grimly. Then they'll discover I wasn't bluffing about the house. I'd rather not take it that far, but I will if necessary. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. As we discussed the details, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but alongside them grew a quiet strength that comes from knowing your worth. I would never again silently accept mistreatment to keep the peace. The week passed in a strange mix of tension and calm. I stayed with Grandpa, helping him in his workshop during my study breaks. My parents called my phone multiple times a day, but I followed Grandpa's advice and let them go to voicemail. Their messages evolved from defensive explanations to increasingly desperate pleas as the reality sank in. On Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after that phone call, Grandpa and I drove to my parents' house, his house, legally speaking, to follow through on his ultimatum. We pulled into the driveway just before 10 a.m. My father's car and mother's minivan were both parked out front. They were waiting. Remember, Grandpa said as we sat in his truck, no matter what happens in there, you have nothing to apologize for. Stand your ground. The front door opened before we reached it. My father stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, stubble on his chin, dark circles under his eyes. Ignacio, Dad, he greeted us with visible relief. Come in, please. The living room was meticulously clean. My mother sat nervously on the edge of the sofa. What surprised me was Sophia, sitting in an armchair by the window, her usual confident posture replaced by something subdued. No one spoke for a long moment. The air was thick with unspoken words. Well, Grandpa finally broke the silence. I see you're all still here. Have you started packing? My mother's eyes welled with tears. Albert, please. We need to talk about this reasonably. I believe I was quite reasonable on the phone, Grandpa replied, remaining standing. I gave you a full week, which is more consideration than you gave Ignacio. My father stepped forward. We made a terrible mistake. We know that now. But surely there's a solution that doesn't involve uprooting our entire family. There is, Grandpa agreed. But it requires more than just words. It requires acknowledging what's been happening in this house for years and making real changes. He set his car keys on the coffee table with deliberate slowness. For you to keep living in my house, there are conditions. First, a genuine apology to Ignacio. Not excuses, not justifications, but a real recognition of how you failed him. Second, Sophia needs to face consequences for her actions. And third, this family needs professional help to address the dysfunction that's been allowed to fester. My father looked down at his hands, then back up at Grandpa and me. Something in his expression had changed. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by what looked like genuine shame. You're right, he said quietly. About all of it. He turned to me directly. Ignacio, I failed you as a father. Not just that night, but for years before it. I took the path of least resistance, siding with your mother and Sophia, because it was easier than standing up for what was right. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace, but all I was doing was teaching you that your feelings didn't matter as much as theirs. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the political non-apology I'd expected. I let my own insecurities about providing for this family cloud my judgment, he continued. After nearly losing the house, I felt like less of a man, less of a father. Your mother's approval became even more important to me, and she's always favored Sophia. It was wrong, and you deserve better. My mother, who had been silently crying, finally spoke. I don't know if I can be as eloquent as your father, she said, her voice wavering. But he's right. We failed you, Ignacio. I failed you. She wiped her eyes. I've always found it easier to connect with Sophia. She's more like me, more emotional, more expressive. You've always been so self-sufficient, so capable that I told myself you didn't need as much from me. That was my excuse for giving you less attention, less support, less defense when conflicts arose. She looked down at her hands. But the truth is, I've been unfair. I saw what I wanted to see with Sophia, and I ignored what was inconvenient. I convinced myself her behavior wasn't as bad as you claimed, because facing that truth would mean facing my own failure as a mother. Their words were everything I had wanted to hear for years. Yet, now that the moment had arrived, I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to embrace their apology, to rush back into the comfort of believing my family could heal. Another part remained wary, remembering countless previous disappointments. Before I could formulate a response, movement from the corner of the room caught my attention. Sophia had risen from her chair and was approaching me, her face a mix of defiance and vulnerability I'd never seen before. In her hands was a USB drive. "This is yours," she said, holding it out to me. "It's a backup of all your files from that night. I never deleted them from your computer. I just moved them to a hidden folder and made it look like they were gone. And I switched your hard drive with a broken one from my drawer." I stared at her, processing this. "Why would you keep a backup if you wanted to sabotage me?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I don't know. I guess I wanted to hurt you, but not ruin you completely. I was going to slip it into your bag the next day after you'd already missed your interview." She finally looked up. "I didn't think they would actually kick you out." "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said, taking the USB drive. "You deliberately tried to sabotage something you knew was important to me." "I know," she admitted. "I've been terrible to you, and there's no good reason for it. Just stupid, petty jealousy." She took a deep breath. "You make everything look so easy. School, jobs, making mom and dad proud. You never seem to struggle or mess up. Do you have any idea what it's like trying to follow that? To always be compared and found wanting." I never asked to be held up as an example, I responded. And things weren't easy for me either. I just didn't complain because I knew nobody would listen. "I'm listening now," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry. Not just for the files, but for everything. The borrowed textbooks, the noise when you were studying, the rumors to the family, all of it." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. This wasn't the manipulative Sophia I was used to. This was something new. Perhaps the first genuine interaction we'd shared in years. Grandpa Albert cleared his throat. "This is a start," he said. "But words need to be followed by actions. Thomas, Maria, are you prepared to make real changes in how this family functions?" My father nodded firmly. "We've already contacted a family therapist. We have an appointment set up for next week, all four of us, if Ignacio is willing." "And Sophia," Grandpa continued, turning to my sister. "There need to be consequences for your actions. Have your parents discussed this with you?" "They have," she replied, the old defiance flashing briefly before subsiding. "My car privileges are revoked for 3 months. My phone is for emergency use only, and I'm required to volunteer at the community center every weekend until graduation." She hesitated, then added, "It's fair. More than fair, actually." The conversation continued for hours. Painful truths were excavated and examined from all sides. Old wounds were reopened, but this time with the intention of cleaning them properly so they could finally heal. Throughout it all, Grandpa Albert remained a steady presence, guiding the discussion. By late afternoon, we had reached an understanding. My parents would keep the house, but with formalized conditions about how all family members would be treated. Sophia would face consequences while being given the opportunity to rebuild trust. And I faced the most difficult decision of all, whether to move back home or maintain the independence I had begun to establish at Grandpa's house. As we prepared to leave, my mother asked directly, "Will you come home, Ignacio?" I looked around the house that had been both haven and battlefield throughout my life. "I need time to think about it," I said honestly. "This isn't something I can decide today." She nodded, disappointment visible, but restrained. "We understand. Your room is here whenever you're ready." As Grandpa and I drove back to his house, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the weight of the decision before me. Whatever choice I made would be mine alone, not dictated by obligation or guilt, or the need to keep peace at my own expense. You handled that well, Grandpa said. Better than most adults twice your age would have. I learned from the best, I replied, earning a rare smile from him. That night, as I sat in the guest room, my room, as Grandpa insisted on calling it, I realized that sometimes losing what you thought was home leads you to where you truly belong. And sometimes the family you need isn't always the one you were born into, but the one that stands by you when everything falls apart. After considerable reflection, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I would not return to my parents' house permanently. Instead, I accepted Grandpa Albert's offer to convert his workshop attachment into a small apartment where I could live independently while finishing my senior year. This choice wasn't made from anger or resentment, but from the recognition that I needed space to heal and grow on my own terms. Your room at home will always be there if you change your mind, my mother said when I told them, disappointment evident in her voice, but tempered with a new respect for my autonomy. This isn't about rejecting you, I explained. It's about giving our family the space to rebuild properly, without falling back into old patterns too quickly. Over the following weeks, we established new boundaries. I visited for Sunday dinners and participated in the weekly family therapy sessions, which had become a non-negotiable part of our healing process. These sessions were often uncomfortable, with buried feelings resurfacing and hard truths being acknowledged, but they were necessary excavations of the dysfunction that had taken root. Sophia's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. Without an audience to perform for, her manipulative behaviors gradually subsided. Our therapist helped her understand how her feelings of inadequacy had manifested as jealousy and sabotage, and she began channeling her energies more constructively. Her volunteer work at the community center, initially imposed as a punishment, evolved into a genuine passion as she discovered her talent for working with children. They don't compare me to anyone else, she explained during one of our tentative one-on-one conversations. They just like me for who I am. My parents, too, were making efforts to change. My father became more assertive in family decisions, no longer defaulting to the path of least resistance. My mother worked on recognizing her biases and treating us more equitably. They weren't perfect. Decades of habits don't disappear overnight, but their commitment to improvement was genuine. Meanwhile, I focused on finishing my degree and building my future. To my surprise, Anderson Financial Group called 2 weeks after my improvised interview with an offer for their internship program, citing my exceptional ability to perform under pressure as a deciding factor. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophia's attempt to sabotage my opportunity had inadvertently showcased my resilience. Grandpa Albert supervised the conversion of his workshop attachment himself, handling much of the carpentry personally despite his age. Together, we transformed the space into a compact but comfortable studio apartment with a separate entrance, giving me true independence for the first time in my life. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, he told me as we installed the final shelves. But something tells me you'll be ready to spread your wings wider before long. He was right, as he so often was. With graduation approaching, I had already received 3 job offers, including a permanent position at Anderson Financial. The future I had worked so hard for was materializing before my eyes, no longer undermined by family drama or sabotage. 6 months after that fateful night when I was thrown out, I stood on the university stage in cap and gown, accepting my diploma with highest honors. Looking out into the audience, I saw something I hadn't dared hope for. My entire family sitting together, genuinely proud and supportive. Grandpa Albert sat in the front row, his weathered face beaming with pride. Beside him were my parents, who had taken the day off work to attend despite it being a Wednesday. And next to them, somewhat awkwardly, but present nonetheless, was Sophia, who had created a handmade card congratulating me on my achievement, the first unprompted kind gesture from her in years. After the ceremony, as we gathered for photos, Grandpa pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. A graduation gift, he said simply. Inside was a legal document, a deed transferring 25% ownership of my parents' house, his house, to my name. What is this? I asked, stunned. Insurance, he replied with a wink. And recognition. That house is part of your legacy, too. This ensures you always have a stake in it. Always have a place to return to if needed. I was speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift and its symbolic significance. "Don't tell your parents just yet," he added. "I'll break that news when the time is right. Today is for celebrating." And celebrate we did, with a family dinner that felt more genuine than any gathering I could remember. The conversations weren't perfect or problem-free, but they were honest in a way they had never been before. We were learning, slowly but surely, how to be a real family instead of just people who shared a house and a last name. As I reflect on the journey that began with those devastating words, "I want him gone," I realize that sometimes the most painful rejections lead us to our most important revelations. Being kicked out of what I thought was my home forced me to discover what home truly means. Not just a physical space, but a place where you are valued, respected, and loved unconditionally. The greatest lesson I've learned through all of this is that self-worth cannot be dependent on others' validation. For years, I sought approval from parents who were incapable of giving it equally. I measured my value by how much I could endure without complaint. But true strength isn't found in silent suffering. It's found in having the courage to stand up for yourself, to set boundaries, and sometimes, to walk away from situations that diminish you. Forgiveness, I've discovered, doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. It means choosing not to let that hurt control your future. I've forgiven my family, not for their sake, but for mine, because carrying resentment only weighs down the carrier, never the target. Today, as I prepare to start my new job and move into my own apartment in the city, I do so not as someone escaping a toxic situation, but as someone stepping confidently toward a future of my own design. The foundation of that confidence was laid in Grandpa Albert's workshop, rebuilt from the rubble of family expectations and conditional acceptance. If you're facing your own family struggles or feeling undervalued by those who should support you most, remember that your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it. Sometimes the family we find, or the one person who truly believes in us, matters more than the family we were born into. And sometimes being forced to leave is the first step toward finding where you truly belong. What family challenges have you overcome in your life? How did they shape who you've become? Leave a comment below sharing your experience. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience, and share with someone who might be struggling with their own family dynamics. Thank you for listening. And remember, the family that matters most is the one that shows up for you when it counts.